Hello and welcome back to Diplomacy and Discourse. I'm your host AR and I am genuinely excited about today's episode because we're going to talk about something that touches every single person listening. Whether you've got a stock portfolio or $12 in a checking account, we're going to talk about money. Not your money specifically, all of it. The whole pile. Every dollar, euro, yen, and rupee held by every household on the planet. Here's the question that kicked this episode off for me. How much money does the world actually have? Not produce in a year, that's a different number, but actually possess. Stored up in savings accounts, stocks, bonds, pensions, and cash under the mattress. And once you have that number, the really interesting questions begin. Who holds it? Where is it moving? And is it spreading out to more people? Or pooling up in fewer and fewer hands? Every year, a handful of big financial institutions try to answer exactly those questions. The one we're leaning on today comes from the Boston Consulting Group, BCG for short, a global consulting firm that publishes an annual global wealth report. Think of them as the people who count the world's money for a living. They pull together data from central banks, financial regulators, and markets across dozens of countries, then stitch it into one giant snapshot of global wealth. I first came across the headline figures through a newsletter called International Intrigue, which flagged a few numbers so striking that I had to go digging into the underlying reports myself. And what I found is a story with three big plot lines. Wealth is multiplying, wealth is moving, and wealth is concentrating. Hold on to those three words: multiplying, moving, concentrating, because they're the backbone of everything we'll cover today. Let's start with the headline number, because it's a doozy. The total stock of global financial wealth has reached roughly $333 trillion. I'll say that again slowly because it's almost impossible to picture. $333 trillion. Let me try to make that real. A trillion is 1,000 billion, and a billion is 1,000 million. If you start counting $1 per second, it would take you about 31 years just to count to a billion. To count to a trillion? Around 31,000 years. Longer than human civilization has existed. Now multiply that by 333. The number is so large, it stops meaning anything, which is exactly why it's worth slowing down on. And here's the part that surprised me most. That pile didn't just sit there. It grew about 10.7% in a single year, one of the fastest jumps in recent memory. Think about everything happening in the world right now. Wars, trade fights, political turmoil, anxiety about the future. You might reasonably expect global wealth to be shrinking, or at least treading water. Instead, it surged. That tension, chaos in the headlines, growth in the ledgers, is one of the quiet themes of this whole story. So what drove it? Two engines mostly. The first is the stock market. When share prices climb, the value of everything people own through stocks, as well as retirement accounts and pension funds, climbs right along with it. And a lot of that gain is on paper, meaning it exists as a higher number on a statement, not as cash in hand. The second engine is gold. In a year when people felt nervous about inflation and the stability of currencies, a lot of money flowed into gold as a kind of safe harbor, and the price shot up dramatically. When investors get jittery, they reach for something they can hold, and gold is the oldest security blanket there is. Now, what does a number like $333 trillion mean for the average person? Honestly, it can feel like watching a parade go by that you're not in. Because here's the catch, and it's a big one. Averages hide a lot. If a billionaire walks into a room of 10 people, The average net worth in that room is suddenly enormous, but nobody actually got richer except the billionaire. Global wealth growing doesn't automatically mean your wealth grew. Whether you felt this boom depends almost entirely on whether you own assets, stocks, a home, a retirement account. If you do, this was a great year. If you don't, the parade mostly passed you by. Keep that in mind because it comes roaring back later. Now here's a twist I didn't see coming. One of the standout performers was Western Europe, where household financial wealth grew by around 15.3%, even faster than the global average. For a region that's often described as economically sleepy compared to the United States or Asia, that's a remarkable showing. So what happened? A big piece of the answer is something that sounds technical, but is actually pretty intuitive. Currency effects. Stay with me, because this matters. When we measure all the world's wealth, we convert everything into US dollars so we can compare apples to apples. But exchange rates move. If the euro gains strength against the dollar, then European wealth, even if it didn't change at all in euros, suddenly looks bigger when you translate it into dollars. So here's an analogy. Imagine you have a bottle of water, and we're measuring everyone's water in cups. If the size of a cup suddenly shrinks, your same bottle now counts as more cups, not because you have more water, but because the measuring unit changed. A chunk of Europe's eye-popping growth is exactly that kind of optical effect. The measuring stick moved. It's real in dollar terms, but it's not the same as Europeans suddenly saving dramatically more. That said, it wasn't all currency tricks. Europeans are also notoriously diligent savers, tucking away a healthy share of their income, and those steady savings, combined with rising markets, gave the region a genuine boost. Why does this matter? Because it's a perfect lesson in reading financial headlines carefully. A giant growth number can be driven by real saving, by rising markets, or simply by the lens we're viewing it through. And usually it's a blend of all three. Always ask what's actually underneath the number. Now we get to the part of the story that I find most important, and frankly most uncomfortable, because alongside all this growth runs a second, quieter trend. The money is pooling at the top. Germany is the clearest illustration. It's one of the wealthiest countries on earth, the economic anchor of Europe. And yet within Germany, a staggering 27.3% of all private wealth, more than a quarter of everything the entire country owns, is held by roughly 5,000 ultra-rich individuals. Let that sink in. Out of a population of more than 80 million people, about 5,000 of them control over a quarter of the nation's wealth. Alright, let me try to make an analogy to make this scale vivid. Picture a stadium packed with 80,000 fans, where each person represents 1,000 Germans. Now imagine the wealth of the whole stadium piled up as cash on the field. More than a quarter of that entire mountain belongs to just 5 people in the stands. Not 5 sections, 5 individuals. Everyone else in the stadium splits what's left. And here's the crucial point. This is happening inside one of the richest, most stable, most egalitarian-minded nations in the world. So the story of the concentration isn't really a story about poor countries versus rich countries. It's a story playing out within wealthy nations. The gap widening between the very top and everyone else, even in places we think of as prosperous and well-balanced. So why should we care beyond a sense of fairness? Because wealth isn't just money, it's power. It shapes which businesses get funded, which neighborhoods get developed, which political campaigns get bankrolled, which voices get amplified. When wealth concentrates intensely, so does influence. And that has a way of feeding back on itself. Those at the top can use their resources to shape rules in ways that help them accumulate even more. History tells us that when ordinary people feel the system is rigged against them, that resentment doesn't stay quiet. It shows up at the ballot box, in the streets, and in the rise of leaders promising to upend the whole arrangement. The numbers on a wealth report and the turbulence in our politics are more concentrated than they might appear. Let's shift from who holds the money to where the money goes, specifically where the wealthy park their fortunes across borders. For generations, if I said the words offshore wealth, your mind probably jumped to one place: Switzerland. Swiss banks, with their reputation for discretion and stability, were the undisputed vaults of the world's elite. That era just hit a historic turning point. For the first time, Hong Kong has overtaken Switzerland to become the world's largest hub for cross-border wealth, money that people choose to manage outside their home country. The figure attached to Hong Kong is about $2.95 trillion in international assets, edging just past Switzerland. After decades of Swiss dominance, that's a genuine change of the guard, and it tells us something profound about where the economic gravity is shifting on this planet. So why is it happening? In a word, Asia. As China and the broader Asian region have generated enormous new fortunes, that money wants a sophisticated, convenient place to be managed, and it would rather be managed closer to home than flown halfway around the world to Europe. Hong Kong, sitting right at China's doorstep with deep financial infrastructure and tight links to the mainland, is the natural front door. The wealth is being created in the East, and increasingly it's being kept in the East. The bigger picture here is that the world of high finance is splitting into two camps. There's an Eastern network, anchored by Hong Kong and Singapore, that serves Asian money, and a Western network, Switzerland, the United States, the United Kingdom, that serves Europe, the Middle East, and the Americas. We're moving from a world with one dominant financial vault toward a world with two centers of gravity. And that's not just a banking story. It's a preview of a broader rebalancing of global economic power, with real consequences for influence, regulation, and which financial rules the rest of the world ends up following. If the Hong Kong story is about where wealth is kept, this next one is about where new wealth is being born, and it's arguably the most hopeful part of today's episode. Forecasters expect the developing world to add something on the order of $12 trillion in new wealth in the coming years. The countries leading that charge include India, Brazil, and Mexico, places long described as emerging, now genuinely emerging into the financial mainstream and minting new millionaires at a brisk pace. What's fueling it? A few powerful forces stacking on top of each other. The first is demographics. These are young, growing nations with huge numbers of people entering their prime, working, and earning years, which is like having a strong wind permanently at your back. The second is entrepreneurship. Vibrant startup scenes and small business booms creating fresh fortunes from scratch rather than inheriting them. And the third, maybe the most quietly transformative, is financial inclusion. For the first time, hundreds of millions of people who were entirely outside the formal financial system, no bank account, no way to save securely, no access to credit, are coming online, often through nothing more than a smartphone. When someone moves from cash under the mattress to a digital account where their money can actually grow, that's a personal revolution multiplied across a continent. Why does this matter for the rest of us? Because it signals a slow rebalancing of the global economy away from its old North American and European centers. New consumer markets, new investors, and new economic powerhouses are rising. The map of where money is made is being redrawn in real time, and the next few decades of global business will be shaped heavily by these rising players. So let's pull the threads together, because 3 stories have been weaving through this whole episode, and now they snap into focus. First, wealth is multiplying. The global pile hit $333 trillion and grew double digits in a single year, powered by booming stock markets and a rush into gold, even against a backdrop of global tension and uncertainty. Second, wealth is moving. The center of financial gravity is sliding eastward, with Hong Kong dethroning Switzerland as the world's top cross-border wealth hub, and emerging giants like India, Brazil, and Mexico generating trillions in brand new fortunes. Third, wealth is concentrating. Even as the total grows, an ever larger slice is gathering at the very top, with Germany's 5,000 ultra-rich holding more than a quarter of their nation's wealth as the clearest warning sign. Now, why should you care about any of this if you're not a banker or a billionaire? Because these trends quietly set the terms of the world you live in. Concentration shapes our politics. It fuels debates over taxes, fairness, and who holds the levers of power. And it explains the populist anger bubbling up across so many democracies. The eastward shift of money reshapes global influence. Financial power and political power tend to travel together. So where the money pools, diplomatic clout often follows. And the emerging market boom is rewriting the map of opportunity, deciding which countries will be the heavyweights your children grow up in a world shaped by. So where does all of this leave us? With a portrait of a world growing richer, but not growing fairer. The pie is getting dramatically bigger, yet the slices are being cut more unequally, and the whole table is being rearranged, so that new seats of power sit where they never did before. My takeaway is this: keep your eye on all 3 trends at once. Growth without watching concentration tells you half-truth. Yes, the world is richer, but ask who's holding it. And concentration without watching the geographic shift misses where tomorrow's power is being built. Money, it turns out, is one of the most honest storytellers we have about where the world is really heading, if we are willing to read past the headline number and ask the harder questions underneath. That's all for today's episode. If this got you thinking, I'd love to hear from you. What surprised you most? Reach out anytime at diplomacyandiscourse@gmail.com. And as always, thank you for spending your time with me. Until next time, stay curious, stay engaged, and keep asking the questions that matter.